Hi everyone, and welcome to our webinar. You're listening to IXIA Talks Episode 5, another ISO standard. My name is Sydney Jones, and I'm the Head of Marketing Communications here at IXIASOFT. I'll be your host. IXIA Talks is a webinar series that covers DITA, Agile Document Management, localization, IXIASOFT's very own CCMS, and more. Episodes are released periodically and cover a wide range of topics in the telecom industry. Before we get started, a few housekeeping details. This webinar is being recorded. We'll send you the link to the recorded version after it airs so you can share it with colleagues who weren't able to make it today. As audience members, you are muted, so don't worry, we cannot hear you. Finally, if you would like to ask a question during the webinar, please type it into the questions section of your control panel at any time during the presentation. This is in the upper left-hand corner of your screen, and we will answer the questions during the Q&A session at the end of the presentation. So our special guests today are Nolwenn Kerzreho from IXIASOFT and Marie-Louise Flacke from Awel-A-Ben. Hello, Nolwenn and Marie-Louise.
Hi, Sydney.
Hi.
So to get started, I will actually let both of you introduce each other. So Nolwenn, why don't you start?
Yes, certainly, Sydney. So Marie-Louise, we've known each other for a while. You're a serial author and speaker in Europe and in the US, but not only, and are based in Brittany, in France. So you trained as a technical communicator at the American University of Paris in 1993 and enjoyed teaching technical communication in several French universities. And in 2010, and I think we were together on that workshop, you got hooked on minimalism. And if I remember correctly, that was in Vienna. In 2011, you designed a technical communication online training program in French. And well, today that's current. You've developed a new documentation structure for the Paris Fire Brigade, which is the French firefighters in Paris.
Hello. Well, Nolwenn, as everybody knows, is a veteran speaker at conferences, including DITA North America, CMS DITA Europe, Lavacon, TC World, and much more. She is based in Rennes, in France, and she joined IXIASOFT as technical account manager in September 2015. She is also the co-author of the collaboration workshop Snakes and Ladders. And she contributed to the language of technical communication and current practices and trends in technical and professional communication.
Thank you both for the introductions. So Nolwenn, why don't you tell us what's on the agenda today?
So here's what we'll talk about. These are the 10 questions that we've prepared and the different aspects on these new standard. So the first one is really how much of a revolution can we expect from this new standard? Is your company, your content concerned with this new standard? And then we'll tackle a few specific aspects of the standard. So safety information, the minimalism, because there is a mention of minimalism inside this ISO standard, structured content and data, then training and proficiency levels for technical writers, whether and how you can get certified, then how much of future-proofing content delivery can you do with adopting the ISO standard and being compliant with it? And basically, is it worth it? And then we have a special bonus point, which is a 10th question on icons, which is one of our favorite topic. So as you'll see on the next slide, we are talking about this ISO standard. It's actually an ISO IEEE IEC standard, and the official title is Preparation of Information for Use of products, part 1. This is like a series. And this one is about principles and general requirements. There are here 2 ISO addresses, so I believe this will be made available after this webinar as well for you. And I would like to clarify just 2 things. First of all, in this standard, where then talk about instructions for use, we're talking about not user guides, but any kind of guide that would be necessary for all the audience, which means it could be maintenance information, repair guides, parts lists, installation and configuration guides, etc., etc. So every step that needs to be documented on the product life cycle. And when we talk about products here, we're talking about products, but also services. So I just wanted to make that clear. Just so you know, this the draft has been approved, and we're expecting, the final draft has been approved, and we're expecting a release, well, in the coming weeks. And as you see on the next slide, we'll start with our first question. So, Marie-Louise, this one is for you, of course. Is this ISO really a revolution for my instructions for use?
Well, if your documentation follows a waterfall model, if you are describing features and options, if your documentation is polluted with prominent warning signs, you'll have to forget all of it. It's going to be a revolution. But if you have been writing task-oriented, if you have been talking to your users, if you have discarded useless information, you'll be fine with this new standard. Regarding the audience, as you mentioned, this new version insists on target audience orientation, where the information for use shall be usable and relevant for the target audiences with respect to their expected tasks and goals. For sure, you already know it from ISO 26514.
So that's really interesting. This is an excerpt of the information types. I was quite caught up by the fact that there are some mention of 3 information types: conceptual, instructional, and reference. So that probably rings a bell for our audience here, but these are basically the topic types, the basic topic types from the DITA standard. And there is already the clarification between procedure and conceptual information in simplified technical English as well. So on the outputs, what we can see is that we have troubleshooting, information for maintenance, all this kind of information with 3 dots saying, you know, you can use that for all kind of outputs. So as we'll see on the next slide, the second question, as a reminder, is really, you know, what's the impact for me? Is there one? And, you know, my content is really special, right?
Well, I should say all products are very special. This standard applies to all products and all services, where the product can be a system, a service, goods, software, or a combination of thereof. And ISO 82079 gives the principles and general requirements that are applicable to complex and safety-critical systems, such as industrial plants, or to simple consumer products, or to software, or even to specialized testing equipment. Now, the question would be, how comes that this standard is applicable across product sectors? Well, because we focus on target audiences, this means human beings who are subject to human errors. And to help users absorb new information, the techniques are similar. To summarize, what works best has emerged from experience and practice in the field of human factors and technical communication. No theory at all.
That's super interesting, and especially since I believe that the standard mentions a few industries, including the medical devices. So really applicable, a horizontal standard for all industries, basically. So on the third question, it's okay, that's pretty important, right? What about safety information? Are there any mentions of this? And what happens if I'm already using ISO or ANSI? And can you give us a little bit of information on safety information?
Yes, well, safety notes are still required in this new version of the standard. But we have a new article on warning signs that says formatting of the warning message should not distract the target audience from reading the information. Don't insert huge warning messages in your procedures, please. And remember, ANSI is applicable in the US, it's the American National Standards Institute, while ISO standards apply worldwide. Still, ISO 82079 refers to ISO 3864, as you mentioned, and in particular with regard to signal words related to harm to persons. And we have 3 types of signal words: danger, warning, caution. And they do apply exclusively to a risk of physical injury. And by the way, since you mentioned it, ISO 3864 is closely linked to ANSI 535. Please note the clear distinction between the risk of physical injury and the risk of damage to property. We have now new signal words for damage to property. They are notice, attention, or take care. As a general reminder, think that warning messages repeated too frequently may reduce their effectiveness. Let's say adding dozens of warning messages does not increase safety. You mentioned legal requirement. Unfortunately, yes, it's a legal requirement. And in this case, it has nothing to do with efficiency. It doesn't take into consideration research made by Michael Wogalter in his book, Warnings and Risk Communication. It doesn't neither consider articles by Jakob Nielsen about superfluous warnings or publication by Bruce Tognazini about lawyers ruining good documentation. The links will be provided separately. By the way, do you know that the Paris firefighters documentation does not show any single warning message at all? They for sure are not facing dangerous situations.
Yeah, I believe the context is difficult. So that's one of our favorite topic as well, minimalism. So they mentioned minimalistic rules. Would that change something for us, for the audience here? Can you tell us a little bit about the minimalism included in that standard?
Well, if you have already been using or applying minimalism rules in your documentation, there is no problem, no big change, and you'll feel reinforced by ISO 82079. because minimalism is now a requirement. Section 7, for example, requires the content of the information for use shall cover the needs of the target audience for the safe, effective, and efficient use of the product, applying the principles of minimalism. It is a requirement. Well, minimalism, everybody talks about it, but nobody knows exactly what's about. It doesn't mean cutting words, nor cutting sentences, nor giving truncated instructions. Minimalism means that only relevant information is provided. And the standard stresses that excessive documentation of all possible product function is wasteful. It hinders users from understanding how to use a product and from discovering needed information quickly. Minimalism is based on 4 principles. The first one is right, task-oriented. Second one, consider the user's environment when he is working on his task. The third principle is include some troubleshooting information. And fourth principle is pay attention to findability. By the way, it seems the aircraft industry has not yet adopted these minimalism rules. You for sure remember Flight 1549 that ditched into the Hudson River. And I would like to refer to principle 2, because the Airbus documentation was correct, but not applicable under the circumstances as he was about to take off. He was flying at 3,000 feet. It would have been applicable at 30,000 feet. Note that Airbus modified the procedure after the incident. We do have another example of applying minimalist rules. In the case of Lion Air, the documentation problem relates to principle 4, findability, because in this case, the pilot could not find the right procedure while he was ditching in the Indian Ocean.
Okay, pretty telling stories here. But if so, that's about minimalism. But surely, if I'm using DITA, or some kind of structure, it certainly helps, right?
Well, actually, if you are using DITA, it helps for the structure, and there is no problem with minimalism because DITA authoring is based on minimalism. And you'll feel like confirmed by this new standard. We do already have mentioned the 3 information types. There is no big change here. And you were talking about using the previous version of the DITA standard. No problem, as long as you are sorting your information types. The very first version of DITA was already based on these 3 types. And I see you are interested in using some XML. Well, some XML is pretty vague. Do you mean docbook? Well, I've never heard of content reuse with docbook. And you? But by the way, the standard doesn't ask you to design your doc in XML, but to structure your documentation in information types. And let me add that this standard is very rich, as it also gives guidance about tasks, instructional steps, dynamic delivery, use of information models, and so forth.
It's pretty complete. Okay, so as we'll see on the next question, it's really, so there are, and I found that really interesting, there are some mentions of who should write the documents. And so if I'm looking at that standard, does that mean I need to train or retrain the technical authoring team?
Well, I'm afraid if your team has not received any proper technical communication training, the standard gives you the reason to change and ensure your team follows the best practices and guidelines. Let's say such rules about information types, structured documentation, instruction design with numbered step, please, and writing in imperative mode, and also about terminology, usability testing, documentation process. All this is included in the standard, and there is a recommendation for a training for your documentation team. In particular, in section 10, professional competencies, we have this essential requirement to maximize the comprehensibility and safe use of a product. Tasks related to information for use shall be assigned to competent persons. That's why the standard considers 3 professional proficiency levels. Level 1 covers the use and application of relevant standards to define the infrastructure and develop or update information. That's what I would call plain technical writing. Level 2 requires the ability to determine the requirements for the information products, taking into account the purpose and domain to which they apply. And level 3 requires the ability to manage the process of information creation, to develop content strategies, to take responsibility for conformity to applicable standards and policies, and to lead information development teams.
So that's really targeted for more out of the level 3 is more like a management level. And I think that I should mention that there are some, just one small part about translation competencies, but nothing, I don't think there is anything new here. It's just stressing out that the translators should be fluent in the target language. But that's it. It's very it's really a summary. So okay, so that looks like interesting. And is there a way to get certified for that, or compliant to that ISO standard?
Well, as of now, I'm not aware of a certification program applied to this new version. But we do have 2 types of self-assessments in Annex A. The first annex relates to the methods for empirical effectiveness checks of information products. Let's say checking the effectiveness of your documentation. And this refers to usability tests, for example. And the second part of this annex relates to competency evaluation. And it relates to the skills of the documentation team. It clearly states the evaluation should consider interviews, documented evidence showing education or experience, continuing training certificates, and a training plan showing continuing training of technical writers on relevant topics. So training is a must, I must say.
And showing proof of it. Switching to another aspect, and we're trying to cover as much as possible here, but you know, if I'm putting some effort into that ISO standard, is there anything regarding the delivery and the new output methods? We've been talking about chatbots, IoT, and so on. So what does the standard states about this?
Well, standards, it's pretty well done and future oriented, I must say, because in section 2.3, we do have an article about media. We should consider the choice of media in view of the needs of the target audience for information accessibility. Electronic information for use can be provided in combination of audio, visual, or written forms on separate media through the internet for use on various stationary or mobile viewing devices or embedded in the supported product. And section 9 talks about possible media such as videos, speech, augmented reality, virtual reality, QR code, and so on. I think it's pretty great. By the way, talking about chatbots and videos, do you know that you can reuse your task topic to draft the scenario of your video, or reuse your troubleshooting topic in a chatbot? By the way, a recent article in the TC World magazine recommends we should consider developing 2 writing styles, one for screen interface and one for voice applications and chatbots. My point is no, absolutely no. This standard is based on minimalist authoring. And for those past 20 years, minimalist savvy technical writers have been writing task-oriented, or let's say action-oriented, and user-focused. We talk to our users. Therefore, following this standard, you are ready for the next steps: chatbots, voice application, and IoT.
Right, I understand that's it's very reassuring. So I think our next question is really, you know, is it worth it going into compliance or into some sort of detailed adoption of the ISO 8279? Would you recommend it?
Oh, definitely. We have been talking about some of the standard features, but this standard is a perfect guidance to starting and developing a documentation project. It includes all the steps of management process, target audience analysis, information design, reviewing and testing, and such topics like legibility, readability, and comprehensibility. And yet, it helps make your content future-proof. And for us in Europe, let's say at least in France, it's a very good answer to some critiques from management. Why is the installation manual so thin? Well, because we included only the accurate information necessary to install the product. It's separated from the operator's manual, and it follows the design rules given in ISO 82079. And that usually closes the discussion.
Yes. So now for our our favorite about icons. I believe you mentioned some recommendations about media and image, but is there something very specific to icons? You know, is it an icon jungle in there, and do they help you clarify things? And should basically we create our own icons?
Well, this standard has, of course, a section about icons, and it stresses the icon should uniquely represent objects or functions, and different icons should never be used for the same object or function. Remember, there are already lots of defined or standardized icons. Don't spend time designing new icons. Research has demonstrated that people hardly get the right meaning of icons. Take the example of pregnant women on medical leaflets. In the US, a survey has shown that a high number of women thought this icon means it is going to prevent them from becoming pregnant. And moreover, NZ 535 requires that 85% of your users should identify correctly the concept with no more than 5% critical confusion. This means 85% of your users must understand correctly the meaning of your icon. Additionally, don't use icons to make your documentation look good, please. It's disturbing your user. This has been demonstrated by eye tracking survey. Your end user doesn't open the manual to look at your icons. And if you have designed wonderful, beautiful icons, please add them in a birthday card, not in your documentation. I would also encourage you to check articles by Gary McGovern about the Hamburg icon, for example. Additionally, you should look for presentation by Patrick Hoffman, who is currently lead of design operation for Google's search usability team. We can provide you with links.
Yes, we'll send out the links to the resources that we've mentioned during the webinar. So I would say that, and thank you so much for all this information, Marie-Louise, but what I understand is that this is basically a must-have resource. It's also IEEE IEC standard. It's something that you can download, so the approved draft is less expensive. That's the finalized version. So I would encourage you to go and have a look now. And the applicability per region, yes, as you know, these are international standards. So it's also an FDIS standard, and is probably going to be replicated to regional or national standards as well. You'll find in there a lot of useful information about the processes, training your team, etc., but also helpful checklists and flowcharts for the assessments, especially. And as we'll see, I think that's it for us. So as we'll see on the next slide, I think it's time for us to take questions.
It is. So thank you very much, Nolwenn and Marie-Louise. We'll start wrapping up now with the Q&A period. So quick reminder that if you have any more last-minute questions, you can type these into the questions section of your control panel. So our first question is, do I need a CCMS to comply with ISO 82079?
I'll probably answer that one. Well, no, the standard doesn't state or doesn't encourage any kind of tool or methodology, although there are some mentions of topics and topic types. It doesn't state, you should use this technology or this technology. So that the answer would be no, you don't need a CCMS to comply.
Okay, and we have another question here. I have looked through the standard myself. Do I need to comply with ISO 82079 for the CE marking?
I think these are two different options. CE marking relates to Europe, and ISO is worldwide. So obviously, if you are following the guidelines from ISO 82079, nothing is going to be wrong. And you can apply, make the different steps, follow the different steps for your CE marking, but it's not a contradiction.
Nolwenn, do you have anything to contribute?
No, I think it's perfect. It's rather complementary instead of mutually exclusive. You can do both, obviously.
So that looks like that's it for our questions for today. I wanted to thank everyone for tuning in to IXIA Talks episode 5, whether it's your first webinar or you've come to many. We thank you for joining us. And Nolwenn, Marie-Louise, thanks so much for coming in and sharing your expertise today. It was a really, really interesting talk. I really appreciate you guys coming in. Our next webinar.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Bye.
Our next webinar is scheduled for May 9th, 2019, so tune in for an engaging presentation on the path to Information 4.0. This will be with co-founder of the Transformation Society, Ray Gallen. So follow us on Twitter, check out our website, and stay in touch for updates. If you would like to be featured in one of our webinars or you have a unique topic idea, please get in touch at team.ccms@ixiasoft.com. We'll see you next month.